Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast. Whether you are a sales professional, not in sales but interested in helping people solve problems, or a founder CEO who is looking to grow your business, you'll find practical tools, stories, and experience you can apply to your role. I'm your host, Jody Mayberry, and this week, Mike Simmons, the founder of Catalyst Sale, is going to talk to Daniel Peter. Dan is the Salesforce Practice Lead at Robots and Pencils and a returning guest to the podcast. So welcome back, Dan, and let's get to work with Mike Simmons and Daniel Peter.
Dan, it is great to be back with you. It's been a long time since we had you on the podcast. You were actually one of our first guests on the podcast.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I've seen you've had some great guests since then, so congratulations.
Thank you. And we are now up to, I think we've added over 100 episodes since you were on. So we continue to stay here and people must be finding value out of it because they're continuing to share information and we're getting more listeners each week. And I just want to thank everybody out there for sharing this with people inside their organizations, folks inside throughout your community. And it really helps others discover the podcast when you provide a rating and review. So Dan, it's been a while since you've been on. What's new with you? What was 2018 like?
Yeah, so last time I was on, I was working at Canandy. We were building that ERP on top of Salesforce. So, for various reasons, we ended up being acquired. Turns out like ERP is a lot harder to sell than we thought it was. Companies are banking their whole business on this. And so, they don't just buy it on a whim. It's long sales cycles and so forth. So, technically our product was great. Learned a lot of stuff on how to do the most difficult things you can do on the Salesforce platform. But, we got acquired around January 2018. I decided to leave. Candy got acquired by Rootstock. I decided to leave. And, for the first time in my career, I actually decided to take a break, to try to give a little headspace to figure out what's next. Prior to that, I was always jumping from job to job. But I said, if I allow some time and I'm a lot more intentional about this, I'll probably end up with a much better outcome. So my plan was to go on sabbatical in 2018, not necessarily the whole year, but maybe a good chunk of it. But actually right away, I got just a huge influx of different job opportunities. So did a lot of interviewing, over the phone, in-person interviews, and just a lot of different interesting opportunities came my way. And to be frank, it was kind of overwhelming. And what it turned into, say January, February of 2018 was like, it was more than a full-time job just to respond to the interviews and things like that. So it's pretty much the opposite of a sabbatical. I did learn a lot though, I interviewed at a lot of places, so I kind of got a good pulse on what's going on in the Bay Area.
So what was that process like when you go through this thing and you say, I'm going to go ahead and take a break. I'm going to go on a bit of a sabbatical. And now there's all this demand out there. How did you deal with the demand? What'd you learn from the demand? And what did you decide to do as you went through the remainder of 2018?
Yeah, well, the biggest takeaway there was the sort of the further you get along in your career, the harder it is to find a good fit for your next role. Canandy really was going in the deep end and it grew me so much. Pretty much there was no Salesforce developer role out there that would have been, kind of a growth opportunity. They were all, frankly, pretty easy compared to what I had done. So Salesforce developer really wasn't the greatest role for me at any company after that. So, I don't know what the formula is, but, for every sort of 5 years of investing in your growth, it seems like it might take an extra 3 to 6 months or something. You get to this point where it's like it can take you years to find your next role that's a good fit. And in fact, maybe there is no role that's a good fit. Maybe it's more you need to start something for yourself because it doesn't exist. So that was the biggest takeaway there. And I did get pretty overwhelmed with the whole thing. So, my solution there, I did get out of town. I just bought a plane ticket to Colombia, South America. My goal was to hang out there on the beach and try to get some clarity. So I stayed in this little stick hut there for, about a week. And probably towards the end of it, I was kind of totally unplugged and decompressed. And I got some clarity. And that's where I decided, I was going to say no to all these job opportunities and maybe just do the independent consulting route. So, several consulting opportunities came my way just through relationships and word of mouth. And so, I just worked from home, talked to the clients, sometimes went to their offices, and just did a ton of, high value Salesforce development consulting work through 2018. And it financially was probably better than, any of my previous roles. But I started to hit the growing pains of being a one-person operation. You're the bottleneck. Your hours don't scale. And so all during 2018, I was talking with this company, Robots and Pencils. So it was introduced to me through a former CEO there that had moved on to Salesforce. So shout out to Phil Komarny. He's my first introduction there. But I met with him, met with the founder, MJ, met with President Tracy Zimmerman, and just kind of started the talks through 2018. I let them know, independent consulting was going very well, and they let me know, hey, our customers are asking for Salesforce. So what Robots and Pencils is, they're a 10-year-old company. They started with mobile games, and 10 years ago, they made like Spy versus Spy, if you've heard of that one, for iOS. They kind of have a lot of geek cred there. But what they are is the robots and the pencils are kind of like a blend of humanities and sciences. Robot would be like a creative UI UX type person. Pencil would be a creative UX type person. Robot would be software engineer. So the idea is they have both of these folks. They can bring them together to really make some great apps. Apps that are not only like very technically sound, work very well, but they also are beautiful to look at and like people love to use them. So that's a cool vision, cool name. This is not your average consulting company. I mean, they have their secret weapon. Hopefully nobody tries to poach any of their employees because of this, but like their secret weapon is they have an unfair share of talent. So they invest very heavily in seeking out the very best people in the world. And not everybody knows about them. Some of these folks are a little introverted, but behind the scenes, these people are building some of the coolest things out there. So, all these things were pretty intriguing to me, but to be honest, it actually sounded too good to be true. So I didn't think too much of it through 2018. But, as we started to further our discussions, I realized, there actually is some truth to what they're saying. This company, I kind of believed in the vision, and, I read about them in the news. They had actually an acquisition in the summer of 2018. Missions.ai was a product they built for Slack, which Slack acquired. And I remember I went to like TechCrunch one day, and they had 2 front page TechCrunch articles related to Robots and Pencils. One was about the Missions.ai Slack acquisition. The other one was about this My31, this humanity, this 31st human right to own your own data as your property, which is another one of their clients. I was like, okay, this company's doing some really cool stuff. It's not often you even see like even Amazon or Microsoft, makes 2 articles on the front page of TechCrunch. I was like, wow.
Sure.
Yeah, it's like, I thought this could be a great solution to being the bottleneck of being an independent consultant. It's a 200-person company. They've got a lot of the processes in place.
Yeah.
So maybe this would be a way for me to scale my no longer scalable independent consulting without having to take on the risk of, hiring people and worrying about their payroll on my own. So this kind of seemed like a nice happy medium between, risk and reward for me. And the opportunity there was not just to start and grow a Salesforce practice, but it was also to have access to this amazing talent and do some things at the intersection of, say, Salesforce and mobile apps, or Salesforce and UI UX, or even like Salesforce and data science. So, those were the reasons I ultimately decided to join. So we made that announcement around September, October 2018. So I've been there a little while now. I brought my existing clients over, and we've been growing with a lot of interesting new opportunities. So I think we're getting ready to ramp up in terms of bringing on some more folks. Right now, there's just 3 of us in the Salesforce practice, but we've got a lot of cool work in the pipeline, higher ed work, and different types of industries. So we're going to need to bring on some more people soon. And yeah, it's definitely a growth opportunity for me. I've been mostly a Salesforce developer, and now I'm involved in, sales, building teams. It's a lot of great new things for me there.
That's awesome. And one of the things that I know people have listened to the podcast have heard before, we talk about sales for non-sales professionals. So how has this transition been for you as you start to move into what, I know you said leading this practice area. I think of it as like a general manager role where you've got responsibilities for both the operational things that are happening, the work that gets done, and the sales aspect. When you put it in the context of sales, what have you learned about sales in the last, let's say, 3 to 6 months that you didn't know coming into it?
Yeah, well, I've definitely learned, I've learned that I have a lot to learn. And the good news there is I do have a lot of support. So there's salespeople at Robots and Pencils that are helping me. So if anything, maybe I have a little more of like a sales engineer type role. I've do like customer demos or answer their questions about what's feasible or not. I don't know that I'll ever be exactly a salesperson just because I've got too many years of value of investing in myself and being an engineer. But, maybe you can answer this, but part of the sales process, I think, is, having a way to convince people you're competent of doing the job, these types of things. And, I think I really can shine there. Probably my biggest gap is underselling myself there. So, it's nice to be on a team where other people can help out there. Maybe I'll come in and say, yeah, you can do anything on Salesforce. And, then some of the team members can step in and, say things like, oh, hey, this is the most certified guy in the world, or things like that to help sell me where I fall short there. So I think I have a lot of, I don't know what's your sense? Is sales something you can learn, or is that more of a personality that you're born with, or some of both?
Well, I think we all do it in some way, shape, or form. I mean, a lot of what you're describing is whether you're in the consulting role or you're building out this practice area, your focus is solving problems for your customers, and you're engineering some type of solution for the customer. The same thing happens on the sales side. You're working to understand the scope of requirements, the challenges that your customer is running into, and then you're helping them connect the dots between that problem and the solution that exists out there. In some cases, it's a technical solution where you're putting together ones and zeros, or you're writing a bunch of code. In other instances, you're delivering that code to the organization because it solves their problem. And I think the challenge a lot of us have with it is calling people to action in a way that makes sense for them to take action. And I don't think about it as convincing them. I think of it more from the standpoint of, how do I uncover the pain, the challenge that they're running into, in a way that it is clearly understood, and they understand that there's a better way to address whatever it is that they're challenged with, and there's a path forward, and here's what the path is. So now you start to get into project management, and I talk about it in 4 pillars. There's the gathering data, the research, scoping out requirements. There's the storytelling, communicating the vision of what could be in the context of what's important to the customer, where they're the hero. There's the time management component, which is spending time doing the right things and knowing what to say no to. And then there's the project management component, which is compelling people to action. So, Dan, I think you're already doing it. I think you just call it something a little bit different.
Yeah, and I know how important this is, right? You can be the best developer in the world, but if you're sitting there and you're not connecting the dots for people, and you're really not realizing your full potential. So I know this is a growth path for me, and I'm up for the challenge, but I do realize there's a lot to know, and I'm fortunate to know you. Hopefully I can get some of your help with this in the future.
Yeah, but you know how to get a hold of me. And so Dan and I usually will go back and forth with each other in direct message on Twitter. In fact, we were going back and forth with each other while watching the Foo Fighters the night before the Super Bowl. So a little bit of inside baseball here. But so, Dan, as you think about like these challenges, so you've got all of this knowledge about how Salesforce can be used to solve core business problems inside organizations. So you're building out this practice to support it. What are some of the things that, from an emerging technology perspective, that are interesting and exciting to you when you think of either Salesforce, or you think of Robots and Pencils, or you think of just what you're seeing in the marketplace?
Well, obviously, I think the days of people being able to sort of keep track of all the relationships in their head is long gone. So it's essentially trying to give that experience as if, you have a real one-to-one relationship with somebody, but in a way that you can scale that. So Salesforce has always been pretty good at this on the data collection side. So just your typical objects you store there, and things like, tracking your communications with people, and also even, maybe like scheduling future communications in a way you don't forget to do them. So I think that's just basically exponentially increasing in a way that, when even good data and having reporting is not even good enough to maintain that So, everybody hears about AI all the time. It's like probably a pretty misused buzzword and maybe it hasn't delivered on its promise. But I think whatever the actual real value we're going to get out of it, it's not going to take over the world, but at least being able to give some efficiencies. Maybe you spent a lot of your day doing sort of your best guess as to what was important to work on, and now you can be a little bit more sure you're working on the right stuff. So the cool thing about Salesforce is, maybe it's not always the most bleeding edge technology, but when they deliver stuff, it's pretty well baked in a way that it can be really accessible to the masses. So I think you'll see with, spring, summer, winter releases this year, they're going to keep rolling out more and more of their AI products in a real useful, accessible way that a lot of people can get value of. It's not going to be, the most bleeding edge AI around the world, but it's going to be very accessible to people. So I think kind of AI at a low, incremental value level to the masses is what we'll see this year. People can start benefiting from that.
So what are some of the mistakes that people make when it comes to either perceptions or understanding of AI?
Yeah, I think the name alone is a big one. Artificial intelligence sounds like, something that replaces a human, but really it's not going to be that anytime in the near future. It's just going to be a way to augment humans, to give them, some increased level of performance, similar to the way that these other systems have done it in the past. Maybe, you could look at a standard dashboard or report and kind of get some insight instead of having to look through record by record and figure that out yourself. It'll just be kind of like the next level of that. So your reports and things will be a little bit smarter. So say it's more like automated data science than it is like replacing a human.
It sounds to me like, we're talking about, or you could even say at one point in time, people looked at the car as AI, meaning it was going to, and there was this huge technology that was going to change the way that everything else worked. And ultimately it helped us expand and get beyond boundaries that we currently lived in. But really what the car was an augmented what we were doing. It made it easier for us to get from point A to point B faster. It increased the distances that we would be able to travel. It still required thinking, or requires thinking to operate it, but it's this kind of, I don't know if I'm coming up with the wrong word here, but like an exoskeleton that you can add to yourself that will amplify what your capabilities are. Is that what you mean when you start talking about augmentation?
Yeah, I think at the highest level, you could say it's just ways to get back more of your time, something like that, ways to get more things done. Then in this case, it's around, sort of managing data related tasks versus a car is transporting yourself, but they're all kind of the same idea, which is time is the most precious resource. What kinds of machines and systems can we build to maximize our time?
And before we started recording, you had mentioned blockchain. How is that changing things? Is that something that we should be aware of? Is that something that will impact how we leverage other aspects of technology, including CRMs going forward? But how does blockchain play into all of this?
Yeah, I think it will. It's going to take some time. Obviously, everybody knows about the whole cryptocurrency. I don't know what you'd call it. It's exactly a bubble, probably a bubble at some point. But
yep.
I think, systems are built right now where everybody wants to have all the data in their own silo. And this creates a lot of problems with, how do you trust this person's copy of the data or this kind of thing? So I think, blockchain solves a lot of these problems. And I think it's going to, if you look at like the US, we're like super behind in a lot of these sort of arcane ways that we keep records and who's responsible for that. I think some of the other emerging countries are kind of have this clean slate to build from. So they're probably even doing a way better job than the US, keeping track of, different medical records, birth certificates, different types of record keeping. That stuff really should live in something like blockchain. I mean, just transparency, this immutability, like, paper records are like pretty easy to falsify. And so it creates a lot of problems that I think blockchain really solves. So, we're excited anytime we get to work on blockchain stuff. I know Salesforce is talking about releasing a blockchain offering, whatever that's going to look like. But you can imagine the value that will be created there from having an agreed upon place to record things that can't be tampered with. And there's just so many use cases for that.
So speaking of emerging markets, you spent a lot of time in India last year. What did you learn from that experience?
Man, I learned a lot. It was pretty eye-opening. I've talked to a lot of folks in India, but over the years, but there's no substitute for going there and hanging out with folks. I know one of the biggest things is just the number of people there. And if you kind of look at world economies, India's rising through the ranks. They'll have, I think, a bigger GDP than the US here in maybe 5 years, something like that. So that, like they're really closing the gap in terms of how advanced they are with their schools, their companies, how they're training everybody. And, that advancement coupled with the sheer number of people there is like really creating a force to be reckoned with. I think one of the biggest eye-opening things I did there was spending some time at various companies in India. So, when we talk about offshore work, a lot of people just think of it as like a black box or something, but is actually able to go into these companies that do a lot of offshore work, see what their offices look like, talk to the people, that kind of thing. And, it's different culture than the US. I feel like, US offices, maybe you're a little bit more, a lot of them have, of course there's all different types, but here in Silicon Valley, a little more entrepreneurial vibe, whereas maybe a lot of the places in India have a little more of corporate top-down vibe, even sometimes, maybe a little too much. Like that's probably one gap that India could still remaining to be closed from India versus the US is adopt that entrepreneurial spirit of the US instead of kind of more like, here's your work for the day kind of a thing. But I know both are important. I think we'll see that in the years to come. I think we'll see India, China, Africa just like becoming perhaps even more innovative than the US, surpassing that because, US has been very innovative historically, but they're also locked into a lot of ways of thinking that maybe will hold them back for the future. So, some of these younger generations in some of these other countries are going to have these like perspectives on how to solve world problems that maybe we don't even have in the US.
I was reading an interesting book. I think the name of it, and I'll include a link in here, but I think it was Predictive Machines is the name of the book. But in there, it talked about how, toward the end of the book, it talks about how much more China is investing in AI technology and AI concepts and just not even from a dollar perspective, which is important, but from the number of research papers that are being submitted in academia. So it's really interesting to see the technology shifts and that level of innovation.
Yeah. I mean, it almost echoes a little bit of like an arms race between the different countries for, world domination. AI is viewed as this great enabler that will allow just, countries to do anything they want to do. Kind of when you talk about making people more efficient, well, you can imagine like if you have more people and they're more efficient, what kind of power you can have as a country.
So I'm going to take this and push us way, way, way back in the Wayback Machine. And the first time I saw predictions starting to work in a way that was tangible was when you wrote some code back when we were at Safari. And you had these images where basically it was something to the effect of, if you like this, you might like that, if I remember it right. And so that was my first experience of actually seeing predictions come into play in an area where you could practically apply it in business. I wanted to go back even a couple of steps before that and think about how sales and sales ops, which is usually sales ops is usually where Salesforce administration will fall under inside an organization. It might be part of a sales enablement team, could be called sales operations. But how can sales from the standpoint of traditional sales better interact with technical folks who are on the operations side when it comes to sharing requirements or communicating and helping both sides really understand the objectives that both are working on?
Yeah, I think getting them aligned is so critical for success. You mentioned the predictive, I want to say proof of concept and ultimately we kind of productize it at Safari. I think the key there, the reason that works so good is because Safari was such an early adopter of this, online learning model that they actually had something like 10 years worth of data. They had like billions of page views stored in their database. So that was, like data is the new oil. They like had this huge reserve of this valuable data. So, same kind of idea with, with Salesforce, with sales ops. You really have to have the good data in the system to enable these fancy types of new AI to make your life easier. So, having a good data model and actually having systems, not necessarily IT systems, but just organizational systems in place to enable people to, kind of, I don't know what the right word is, incentivize people maybe to get things in Salesforce early, often, like completely, not missing holes and things. And some of this can be helped with software, like if you don't like to sit there behind Salesforce and typing in all these calls and emails, well, maybe there's some things you can connect up on your mobile device that'll suck that into Salesforce for you. But, it really is a bit of a garbage in, garbage out scenario. So I think getting the data in there is super important. And then having some type of communications between, the folks who are on the front lines doing the sales with people who are actually in a position to make changes to the systems. So, you want to avoid this complacency of people just dealing with workarounds and broken systems and not saying anything. So I don't know what that looks like. Maybe a stand-up meeting or some building a culture around, maybe it's on Slack or something like that, but building a culture around suggesting how we can do things better, maybe having some voting or some transparency around that, maybe an idea exchange or something like that. But really just, being committed to getting good data in there, keeping up the data, and then improving the processes that are, maybe they're AI enabled or not, but they're leveraging that data. And, in the future, that data is going to be used in ways that you can't even predict right now. So keep that in mind. You want to be a little bit forward thinking. You don't want to start collecting the data at the time you need it. You want to be collecting it like years in advance of that.
I think one of the things that really hit the mark for me as you were describing that is the importance of starting with clean data and putting good information in, and not putting information in just for the sake of putting it in, or just for the sake of being able to move to the next stage in the process. The other thing that I would suggest to anybody who's out there listening who struggled with this, if you're a sales rep and you've struggled with new releases that your ops team is putting into place and how it impacts your workflow, record your workflow. You can record your screen share on your iPad or your phone, or you can record it on your computer, and you can share that information back with folks so that they can see what happens in the actual operation, what happens in the real world work environment, and how are either these extra steps or these extra pieces of information, how are they impacting things? Back when I was at ASU, this would have all fallen into the human factor stuff inside organization development and just helping to improve those workflows. So just as much as a screenshot is worth 1,000 words, a video can amplify that significantly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, uncovering those friction points. Some salespeople are very good at articulating that. They can tell you why the system sucks, but other ones, maybe it's a little bit harder. Maybe if they just give you a video, you can see and pick out what could be done to improve it.
Absolutely. So Dan, we talked about learning and being a part of Safari, where we had all that data that was available and how you could use that data to provide some insights and help get people focused on content that they should find interesting or start making recommendations. How do you see this learning space continuing to be disrupted as things go forward?
Well, every company is becoming a technology company, and maybe the handful of ones that aren't are still, they're still changing. So in general, just everything is changing at an increasing rate, exponential curve, and there's no way going to school for 4 years can really prepare you for what you're going to need to be successful in your career. So obviously, you go to school for 4 years, you come out, you're probably going to do pretty good for a while, but there's going to be a really short half-life of that knowledge. So it's no longer the world in which you go to school and then you kind of ride that long half-life of your knowledge for the rest of your career. So I think just the notion of what it means to be in a school is changing. We've been talking to schools such as Harvard and University of Washington, different schools that are really buying into this notion of the 60-year curriculum, which is really what people need to serve them in a fast-changing world. So I think this means a lot of things. I think it means breaking down and sort of building back up what the definition of something like a degree is, maybe having the student be the center of what their learning is, so it's not centered so much on the school, but it's more around, as a student, maybe you've been to many different schools, maybe they've been many different media formats, but really you as a person, how are you being served by school? How does what you've learned map to what you're going to need to know, to be successful? What are the gaps? What easy things could you do to maybe prepare you for some totally new and exciting career you might be interested in pivoting to, these types of things. I also think blockchain's a natural for this one, like the process of calling a school up and asking them to put together some verification of degrees and different things across different schools and transferring requirements around. Like blockchain just solves this in a real clean fashion. I think everybody can go somewhere and agree upon what you've done, what you're certified to do. So that's the cool thing about Robots and Pencils. They've got a lot of folks there who are really thinking hard about this. They got people with ed tech backgrounds. They're really well connected throughout the industries. So this is an area I'm excited to be a part of in terms of building Salesforce systems to support this. It actually hits home with me personally. I've got like 4 degrees, and I'm seeing they probably have served me pretty well, but maybe I'm one of the last generations to where they are. So, I've got a son and a stepson in their early 20s, and it's not looking like these types of degrees that have served me pretty well are going to serve them very well. So, definitely I think about this on a personal level, but also just as a way to kind of improve the state of the world, really, in terms of getting people skilled up, reskilled, enabling people to have really rewarding, impactful careers and, maybe not wasting their time or money with education that doesn't serve them.
I think the thing that I hope both of our kids leave the house with, and right now I've got a 13-year-old and a 16-year-old, is this interest in learning and wanting to learn, and realizing that where real innovation happens is when you can apply the things from one environment to another environment and deliver a different perspective. And the only way to do that is to continue to get new perspectives. So you're not going to go through I'm going to go in and I'm going to work for this company for 30 years, and maybe some people will do that, as things evolve and go forward and you see this consolidation. And there are a lot of people who are out there working for Amazon now that I would never have guessed would ever go and work for Amazon. And there's so many different opportunities to diversify inside an organization like that. But I think the focus is just having a passion and an interest in continuing to improve. And what I really like about what you were talking about there is then having the records that can continue to follow you by leveraging some of these technologies like blockchain, like these learning record stores, like some of the things that companies like Degreed are working on, and the things that you guys are working on at Robots and Pencils.
Yeah, we've kind of seen, fake news and a sort of misuse of data and a lot of these trends. So I think some of the blockchain verifications of things like, here's a record, this person actually is trustworthy. They have done these things they said they've done. It's kind of the counter to that, bringing that back into check. So you can't just have, Russian bots skewing elections or these types of things. You can kind of weight things that people say, say on social media. You can kind of weight those with, is this person really an authority in this thing or not? That type of stuff. So I think that'll really help correct some of the problems we've seen with things like social media.
Awesome. So Dan, if folks who are out there listening to this want to pick up the conversation with you, they want to kind of see where you're at and what you're up to, where is the best place to find you?
Yeah. So I haven't planned out everywhere I'm going to be this year in terms of conferences. I will be at plenty of conferences this year. I hope to meet some folks in person, but probably the most active place I'm at is on Twitter at Daniel J. Peter. I also run a developer group in San Francisco. If you happen to be in San Francisco, the last Wednesday of the month, any month, every month during the year, just Google like Bay Area Salesforce Developer Group and you'll find out where we're meeting that month. it's in San Francisco, but the location moves around. We generally have 100 people there, so it's a great night to hang out and learn about Salesforce. So those are probably the best ways to get a hold of me.
Awesome. Well, Dan, thanks for joining us on the podcast today. We'll include all the links in the show notes, and I look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Mike.
Thank you for listening to the Catalyst Sale Podcast. Your ratings and reviews help other people discover this show. Please share this episode with someone you think will find this information valuable, and tag us at Catalyst Sale on Twitter, LinkedIn, or Instagram when you do share so we can join in the conversation.